Hi there, this is John Wilkinson again from History Made Easier, looking at Mao's contribution to the communist fight against the nationalists, the Kuomintang or Kuomintang, as China spiralled into civil war. And let me say up front, I'm going to have to be desperately brief covering what I think is a really important period if you're to understand Mao. But if you want more detail, email me at historymadeeasier@gmail.com and I'll send you my notes. And I promise you, I will not pester you. It's a genuine offer, not a scam. But let's get on with my presentation. In 1927, the communist leadership had chosen areas for their fight back to begin. Mao led the fight back in Hunan, though it was not entirely controlled by him, and as in other areas, it only added to the communists' losses and made their survival less certain. Even though Mao was denied the military support he had requested, he was criticized and removed from both the party's Politburo and the Hunan Provincial Committee. Mao regrouped at Jinggangshan in the mountains on the Hunan-Jiangxi border. Leading an army was a new role for Mao, but it was one in which he shone, and he was to lead this army of his to the birth of the Red Army. He led by example, focusing on building morale and commitment, specifically revolutionary spirit. To this end, he made the army an all-volunteer force, not only allowing those who wished to leave the right to do so, but giving them the money for the journey. Those who stayed were promised that their rights would be protected and their voice would be heard through soldiers' committees. For their part, the soldiers were expected to show the peasantry respect. Whenever land was won, it was redistributed amongst the peasantry, while the profits of former landlords was used to fund the army's needs. Every opportunity was used to win over the peasantry, and the workers, and also the petty bourgeoisie. Mao also developed the guerrilla tactics that would be the core of the Red Army's future strategy. But in the winter of 1928, he was forced to withdraw, setting up the Jiangxi Soviet on the Jiangxi-Guangdong border, a base that would survive until 1934. The communists established a functioning government at Jiangxi that administered a territory of about 15,000 square miles and 3 million people, 6 million if the smaller rural Soviets are included, and its army steadily grew. Mao was made the Soviet's chairman and chairman of the Council of People's Commissars. Mao was adamant that if circumstances allowed, establishing strong bases from which the revolution could be consolidated in as wide an area as possible was a priority. It's what he had set out to do at Jinggangshan, and he started all over again at Jiangxi. The economy, therefore, was a key priority. The base area had to be able to supply the Red Army with food, clothing, and as many basic supplies as possible, as well as doing the same for its people. The overriding issue was food, and so land, which the transfer of land from the rich peasants to the poor was also the best means of establishing the revolution's values in the minds of the peasantry. But all land would be state-owned, and peasants wouldn't be allowed to sell it. And there were disputes within the party leadership as to the best way to go about this. And the wider context to this debate needs to take in the Soviet Union, where Stalin was beginning enforced collectivization. Though Mao acknowledged the need for flexible guerrilla tactics, and circumstances dictated its use, he remained adamant that consolidation in a strong base had to be the priority. This meant keeping the army together, not dispersing it so as to assist local insurrections, which is what the leadership in Shanghai favoured. However, party policy, under direction from Moscow, which now thought that whilst there was no evidence for a national uprising, there was evidence that communists could gain control in certain provinces, came round to Mao's way of thinking. But there was still a basic division between the leadership in Shanghai and its urban bias, and Mao and his rural bias. And the leadership in Shanghai continued to criticize Mao. The party was still struggling to find the right direction to take. To what extent should they follow Comintern directives? To what degree should they be independent of the Comintern? Could, or even should, the party's activists be controlled from Shanghai? Or should they leave decisions to the leaders operating on the ground, scattered around China's provinces? Should it better coordinate its army, or continue to operate as largely independent and uncoordinated forces? Should it focus on the cities or on the countryside, the proletariat or the peasantry? Mao was already convinced that he was involved in a nationalist enterprise first, though one with a clear socialist bent. And the nationalism, just as much as the socialism, was specific to China. China's history, China's traditions, even China's geography, China's circumstance. Though ultimately squeezed out by Chiang Kai-shek, the Jiangxi Soviet provided the communists with vital experience of governing, and was to have a powerful influence on future communist strategy. The most important thing that was learned was an insight into the peasant mentality. The peasant would only support change if it was guaranteed by the Red Army. They would not risk change without guarantees, for fear of retribution from the forces of counter-revolution. And a radical levelling of society was not popular. Tired of existing no higher than a subsistence level, the peasantry wanted land and reward for their individual efforts. Also, if land reform was to work, it required the participation of peasants within each village. And Mao's tactic of flexible guerrilla warfare and his rural-based revolution, helped by his radical program of land redistribution, all have their origins in Jiangxi. But I will have to leave Mao in Jiangxi for now. I think the key things to take away from this presentation is that Mao, by this point, is convinced of the correctness of his basic principles for a successful revolution. It will only be successful if Chinese conditions override Moscow's directives, that the CCP must trust the peasantry and treat them well, and that though guerrilla tactics can be successful, a power base is an essential prerequisite for ultimate success. And I would add that Mao by this point had a growing confidence in himself. So, as always, I hope that was useful for you. If so, please subscribe to my channel and get your friends to do so as well. You should also find my website useful, so do check that out too if you haven't already. Thank you so much for listening, and good luck in your studies. Cheers.